design today. This has got a lot of my opinion on it, so I'm expecting some challenges after it, and I want to hear your opinion on some of my my best practices that I like to call them. But it's on form design, and we'll be covering three things. This is only one of two slides. We'll be looking at a standard form just for those. Just for if anybody's not used to what a form looks like in Power Apps, we'll just go a quick view over the standard form, and then we'll look at we'll go a bit backwards from last time. Last time we did a technical run through, and then we kind of mix in best practice and my opinion on best practices and the checklist at the end. We'll be looking at my opinion on form layout, and I've got a bit of OCD when it comes to form layout at times. So again, and I probably don't always do it right, but that's what I want to hear your guys' opinions on. And then we'll go to building a form, and we'll build a form for the device entity that we created in the last session. And so I'm going to turn off my camera while I do this, but we'll just get cracking on with the the form, the standard form, and we'll look at the account form in Power Apps.
Sorry, 1 second, Paddy. Are you recording this?
Yeah, I hit record.
Cool.
Yeah, I seen that pop out because I forgot all about it.
Cool.
So let's close that down. And yeah, so if you're building along, you'll see you've got a device procurement unmanaged solution in there. Same one as last time, but it's got the version updated. And I've put some more customizations in there. So we'll open that up, and you've got a device procurement app, model-driven app. And if you've published all your customizations, you should be able to play that. If you can't play it, or if you can play it and you don't see the site nav the same as that down the side, then it just needs to be published. If you can't see it at all, then we'll set you up with a new environment if you just reach out to Claire or Reese through the chat. And feel free to jump in any questions. So as I said, the first bit we'll work through is just a generic form, and we'll look at the account form and how it's laid out. So if we open up an account that we've got in Power Apps, we've got a header at the top here. It's giving you some information, and this is if you click the arrow, that's how you edit the header in there. This is in the new unified interface. You can't edit it by clicking on the buttons, and you can normally fit about 4 items in the header. Then you've got the title section. You get a bit more than just the primary key or the primary name of the entity at the top. You get an image if the entity's got an image field associated to it. And you also get a form selector, because remember, you can have multiple forms in Common Data Service and Power Apps. So you can get your form selector there, and you can switch between the different forms. And this is one of the reasons I said the first thing I do when I create a custom entity is to rename the information form to the name of your custom entity, or you sometimes get confused with many information forms in here. So what else have we got in the form? We have a footer down the bottom, and that always contains the save button and the activate button and a little pop out, which will pop out the record when pressed. I think that's reasonably new, actually, the last couple of months. And we have tabs along the top, so we can flick to different tabs. We have related entities. And then we have the main bit of the form in the middle, and this is the bit we have most customization, most input, most control over how that looks. And within the main part, we've got different sections, and it's the sections that contain the different components. And components can be anything from fields, like these here, to quick views, subgrids, like the subgrids over here that we've got, and custom PCF controls or other special controls like the timeline we've got here. And on the layout of the form, the layout is it's quite important. And it's something that you need to get input from your end users on, because it's highly customizable. It can look as good or as bad or as complicated as you want. And so I always go back to the end users. When I say end users, but that can sometimes be quite difficult. You might not have. Am I still there?
We can hear you now.
All right, cool. Where did I get to?
You said you were going to say end users, and then it was like
End
you were
users.
going to say something terrible because you just went really quiet.
All right. So the end users might not be as accessible, and of course you don't want to give them full responsibility over designing the form. You want to give them a bit of advice as well. So what I normally do is I start off with creating a kind of prototype form or a first draft of how I think the form should look. And this is where we'll discuss on, and I'll discuss some of the things that I think about when creating a prototype form, some of the things that I do and take into consideration, and then you can challenge them after the session. So yeah, I build a prototype form, and then at a later stage, I'll get the end users involved, and we'll maybe do a kind of live build where we kind of use the form designer and design it the way that helps them use the system as well. And then probably get a power user or an admin user involved in that as well, because it helps as well that session helps us kind of drip feed them some admin training as well. So there's three things I think about when I design a form. And the first one is consistency. So I like my forms to remain consistent, and I find it helps user adoption for forms to have a consistent design throughout the system. And I like to follow Microsoft's lead on that. Again, this is completely my own opinion. Because Microsoft have the accounts, the contacts form, they have the core key information up here on the left-hand side. An important part for contacts and accounts are the timeline. They have the timeline in the middle, and then they tend to have related records down the side. And so I like to keep that. Now, even I say a copy of what Microsoft did. If you're using any of the Dynamics 365 first-party apps, that doesn't necessarily, they don't keep it consistent through that either. But they do tend to have a main focus bit in the center. So if you're on an opportunity, for example, they'll have, a quote, for example, they'll have a list of the product items or some kind of large subgrid in the middle. I've worked with, again, senior consultants who prefer to keep activity. They always have activities down on the right-hand side. Again, it's your preference or your user's preference once you start speaking to your user, how you have the form. But I just find it really helps if you keep it consistent for each entity, or at least within the app, keep it consistent. So the next thing I like to think about is the flow of the form. And when I say flow, I don't mean Power Automate, I mean how the form flows. So the form should, in my opinion, flow to whatever business process the form facilitates. So a good example again is the Dynamics 365 opportunity form. You wouldn't have on your first summary page a list of your quotes unless the business process dictates that. You'd have your core information, and then later, as the user works through the process, you want to guide them through the process by means of the form, as well as the business process. You'd probably have another tab with opportunities and product lines later on in the form. And again, you also want to consider what the customer needs first as well. So that's where these sessions come in later on. After the first draft's been done, this is where they come in and they say, well, this part of the process, we would do that first, so we move that up the form. And the flow of the form and the consistency of the form can kind of fight each other as well, because as well as you need to get a good balance between consistency and the flow. And another thing I want to do when I keep in mind when I'm designing forms is to minimize scrolling, because people don't like to be scrolling down or looking around looking for fields, especially require fields. So we as humans, and most of us live in the Western world, we read top to bottom, left from right. So I like to keep my required fields up in this area here, because that's where we're drawn to, other than images, that's where we're drawn to, and that's where we'll start looking for information naturally. So we'll start here and we'll start populating our required fields. And then talking of required fields, I like to keep them quite minimal as well on the create of the form, just because people don't want to be. If you make loads of fields required, then people will feel forced to put data in them. They don't want to. They maybe want to create a record quickly, and they'll end up getting bad data in those fields. And to tell you a story of an implementation I worked on previously, they had probably over 10, possibly 15 plus required fields on their opportunity form across multiple tabs and across the whole page. So they're scrolling, and they really wondered why their salespeople wouldn't and wouldn't load their opportunities, or were reluctant to load opportunities while they're out on the field, because they were using the mobile app as well. And so when they were adding their opportunities, they would get an error message that would say you need to populate required fields, and then they would spend ages scrolling down and looking at the different tabs, and it was the classic interface as well, so loads of times scrolling looking for the multitude of required fields to populate in. And so just simplified it down and cut all the required fields back and moved them up to a place where they're quite noticeable. So that's really my views on form layout. Again, I hope we can have a bit of discussion about that later on. What we'll do next, we'll look at some of the common components used when we're building the form by looking at device entity. Before we do that, I just wanted to draw attention to the account form before I do that, and something that doesn't work within the unified interface. So if I open my account form, I think I've actually changed it on this one. I've actually corrected it on this one already. It's the composite address field. So by default, the account's got this composite address field. You can only see that if you switch to classic view. And so what I do, the first thing I do when I'm dealing with any account form is I look for that composite address field because it doesn't render correctly within the unified interface. I remove it and replace it with the actual individual fields. So let's have a look at our device entity. And what we'll do, we'll start building the device entity form. So if you're working along with us, we click on device, click on forms. Hold on, I think if it's not there, then add it. This is where I get worried because my solution hasn't imported fully. Hold on. Let's go back to device, add subcomponents. Add the device form. This is already going to have my customization, so I can tell it now. Yeah, so this is one I'd done earlier because my DevOps pipeline failed. So this is what I'd done earlier. So this is what it should look like once we're finished today's session. What I'll do, I'll delete these off, and we'll walk through adding some components to the form. So you should all have that the same on your device form, and we'll get rid of that as well. So the first thing that I like to do, although it's already done, is I like to put the owner up in the top right-hand corner. And again, this is me being a bit OCD. The owner is an important field within Dynamics. So just about every record, every entity will have an owner field. And I always like just to put it up in the header, just so that whenever anybody goes into any other record, they can see exactly, they know exactly where that's going to be within the system. They know it's going to be in the top right. And again, that's just my own personal preference. I also like the status reason up there as well, because again, just about every entity in the system has multiple status reasons that I find. And I like it just to be in the header in the top right, and any other important information keep up in the top right. Another thing not to be forgotten about is the footer. Now, the footer takes up screen real estate anyway, and it's one of the things that's often missed. So if we look at the form, we've got this space down here, and why not just use it? And even if you can't think of anything worthy of putting in the footer, back when I'm from using CRM 2011, you used to always have the modified on, modified by, created on, and created by fields in the footer. And so a habit of mine, unless there isn't anything more meaningful that you like on every tab on the form, I automatically just put in my modified on, modified by, created on. And if you go down to the next one, you've got a fourth one down here, which is the created by. And again, I just do that on every form that I create. So the next thing we'll do is add some fields to the form. And you add them in the new interface just by clicking and dragging them over. If you've already created your field, you can click them and drag them over to the form. So we'll add the device type up here. We'll put the price back on. And that's all we'll do for now. I also look at the tabs as well. So if I highlight the tab, again, this is my OCD. I like my tabs either to be in thirds or to, if I've not got an activity pane or a kind of big control or a subgrid in the middle, I always keep it to be the first third, the core information, and then my second third will be a larger subgrid or multiple subgrids down here. And you can do that by highlighting the tab, clicking format, and if you choose, I'll show you the different layouts. One column takes up the full page. 2 columns will split it in half, and 3 columns will put it into thirds. And again, just because I like things in thirds, even though I'm only using 2 columns, it's roughly a third, I always change it to 35 and 65 width. So we've got a larger bit to see our subgrids, which will show us so we can fit all the columns in our subgrids right across the page, and a smaller bit for our core and key fields. And then what we'll do, we'll add a component, we'll add a section. So you do that by clicking Add Component, and we can just add a section here. And I'll add it underneath the first bit. And when I add a section as well, again, this is me being a bit pernickety. I always like to give the section a name, and I always name my sections based on the tab. So if I say this section, I would say general underscore, and we're going to call this technical specifications or tech specs. And what I always do in my sections as well, and again, this is purely my preference, I like all my sections to be capitalized across the system. I just think it makes them stand out more. And so I always put capitalized section labels. And again, it doesn't really matter whether they're capitalized or not, but it just enforces that consistency if each section you have on it is a capitalized section. And we'll just do the same with that one as well. Call that orders. And I'll tell you the reason why I name things in this way, as opposed to just leaving the default names on them. So I used to work with on a big implementation, and we had a lot of third-party development teams coming in. The organisation bought some other software off another partner based down south, and they were doing some development, and proper application lifecycle management wasn't followed correctly, and someone added sections into the production or the sandbox environment whilst there was development going on, and hadn't named them either. And every time there was a release of custom code, it was in custom JavaScript, their code wouldn't work because the section names weren't correct. And you could look at their You can see their code, and it just makes it a lot easier for developers and third parties to see what sections are being referenced within JavaScript on the form. So I always follow the same naming conventions, and it means if I call that it means someone can tell if that's referenced in any script anywhere, they can tell exactly where it is. It's within the general tab. It's in the order section. So we'll add some more fields to the technical specifications section. And let's put on some memory, processor, move that one up there, and the storage. And again, we'll just click and drag and move them across. The next thing we'll do, and again, as I said, I like to keep my related items all grouped together down the right-hand side, but we'll add another component called a subgrid. Now, subgrid's a view of records. And we've got a bit more control over a subgrid. So if we click to add the subgrid, we can choose to show related records or not. Now, clicking to show related records will only return records that are related to this record, that have a relationship, so like a parent-child relationship or a many-to-many relationship if it's a many-to-many subgrid. And it allows you to choose the relationship. If you don't click that, you can add a subgrid from any entity in the system. I've hardly ever done that. I can really count on one hand how many times I've added a non-related subgrid. It has been done. I was trying to find an example, but I have done it, but I can't find it. I can't think of an example off the top of my head of when I would ever not tick that box. And so for a related entity, we choose the entity we're going to show in the subgrid, and it's called device orders in this case. And we can also choose the view. So we're going to choose active device orders. And we'll move that over there. And once that's added, again, I just like to keep I don't normally show the label on there. On the subgrids. But I definitely want to label that again, because again, if MD's accessing that control through JavaScript, it just makes their code easier to read just by you taking a bit of time and naming them. And you can also allow users to change that view if need be. And what we'll also do here, we'll add a quick view component. And a quick view acts as a window into a related record. So the first thing you do is you choose the lookup field that the quick view is going to give you a window into. We'll choose the manufacturer. And you can select the form that you want to show. And we've got one that we created earlier, which is a manufacturer card. And they can be edited. These quick views can be edited just like other forms by going to the entity and editing them. So let's have a look at what that form looks like now. So we'll save and we'll publish. And we'll open up our, it looks exactly the same as it did before because I forgot to, because I deployed the wrong solution. But we've got our name, our code details up here, a quick view, some technical specs down there. I'll show the label on that, and a subgrid. Now, we could also look at, there's a few other things we'll look at on this just to show you how we can modify these controls even more. If we go back to customizations and we look at, the first thing we'll look at is the lookup field. We can actually choose what view from our saved views to show during that lookup field, to show in that lookup field. And so at the moment, we're looking at all accounts, which means we can select any account there. And we've got things at the moment like, I think Virgin Media is in there. And Virgin Media, Virgin Atlantic. Virgin Atlantic isn't a manufacturer of devices. But if we restrict that view to active manufacturers and we take that off, refresh the page. We're now restricted to a view of manufacturers, and we can't choose Virgin Atlantic, for example. And again, that just improves the user experience as they move through the app, because you don't have people putting bad data into those fields. Another thing that we can do is we can add custom controls to any of these fields. A simple custom control. And I say custom control, some of these custom controls comes out of the box, will come out of the box like this one. So this is a Boolean field, a yes, no field that you can change from yes to no. But we can make that look a bit better by adding a component to it. And we'll make that a flip switch, just see what that looks like. One of the things I noticed, and we'll have a discussion about this later, as checkboxes, you used to be able to switch to classic view and change this to a checkbox. But when I tried to do this today, it didn't render correctly. The checkbox wouldn't render. It just always remained as a flip switch, which was new to me. So that's maybe something we can talk about if anybody else has seen that. But yeah, our flip switch now has yes and no. And again, when we've got subgrids, within Classic View, you've got a lot more controls over your subgrid. So if I show you that, switch to Classic. Now, I'm not sure when these will be getting brought over. I'm hoping they do. But if I double click this subgrid, I can change whether it shows related records, same as before. That's really the only options you get when you're in the maker view. But within the subgrid, you can display search boxes, you can display indexes, which would be an alphabetical list on the bottom, although I'm not seeing the information on that now. And also you can choose to show the chart. So if I click show chart only, I can select a chart and display a chart of that view within that form. If I click save. One of the things I'll do as well is I'll increase the number of rows to open up to 10 so they can actually see your chart and make that bigger. And again, that's something that hasn't been brought over to the maker experience yet. One thing to be aware of as well, which I've done, I'm sure some of us will do, is I've made some changes in the classic view, and then I went in, made some changes and saved and published and saved over my changes in the classic view. So just remember not to save and publish over the top of that if you make any changes in the classic view. So the rest of the page, we now have a nice chart embedded on our form. Again, that's something at the moment that's only available in the classic view. And that's really it, a quick whistle-stop tour of forms. Didn't go quite according to plan with the customizations already in it, but I got there. So does anybody have any questions at all on forms design, or anybody want to talk about form best practice? I'll stop sharing my screen.